with my women's and gender studies classes since 2010. Okay. First, I'd like to start with acknowledgments, and I would like to thank profusely Academic Technology. This would have never happened if it was not for their help and kind of the challenges I think that they presented. And in particular, working with two people, working with Mike Caulfield. I was part of the media fluency and coming up with a rubric, which then was something that I could apply to my working class and with my students. And secondly, Matthew Reagan, who has been the, as he calls himself, the guy, the man in really setting up our web page and then taking care of students' needs with technology issues. Okay, so this again I said was something that I applied to my Women's Studies 101, as well as Women's Studies 290, which is called Starved or Stuffed, Subjectivity and Disordered Eating. And why I decided to use this, I came here in 2008, so my first year I was teaching two Women's Studies courses in the spring of 2009. And I taught them in a traditional manner. The students would read, we'd participate in class, but then what they would do is they would write me papers. So they had to do two papers, which was kind of like a midterm and a final exam. And both papers, the first one was 15 pages, and then the second one was 20 to 25 pages. And some had some really wonderful ideas. We shared the ideas in class, and we used the Writing Center's assistance. But what I figured out was that their ideas really we were just having a dialogue between myself and the students, because I was reading the papers, and we were sharing what was the issues were, the topics, but it really didn't go any further. Even though in class I kind of tried to push students, or we would have a day, for instance, or 2 days where they would present, and then I would encourage questions. But it pretty much stayed as a dialogue between myself and the student. And something that I thought then was, I was kind of challenged to think about other ways to present this to students, other ways that students could participate outside of the traditional notion of papers. And that's where this came up, okay? So the first time I did it, I was teaching Women's Studies 101, and I'm going to show you what this was for. Well, first of all, this is the web page that students would go to, and it would just have some background about myself, and then we would have, I wish we had a pointer there, the bar here, which would have their assignments, as well as a help and how-to, okay? And then what was going on in the dialogue between the entire class. So, actually, I prefer this one. You have with you, or does everybody have it? No. Yeah. Those are the assignments. Thank you, Barb.
Just give it to me, I'll take care of it. Thank you
so much. Okay. So these were what I was challenged to think about with academic technology. In particular, I worked closely with Matthew Reagan, was the first idea of video diaries, okay? And then we would use one application on the, technological application. And then we had narrative commentaries. We would use which utilized a different application. And then finally, our YouTube projects, okay, which again utilized an even different application. So the students in class were not only then learning the material, for instance, either it was topics from Women's Studies 101, which is a very general and broad, to a much more focused class like Women's Studies 290, where we're just focusing on one particular topic within gender studies, which was disordered eating, okay? So they were challenged into this, with that knowledge, as well as the technological applications. And I'm very interested to hear what the keynote speaker's talking about, because she's addressing the ideas of how students were outside of the class are very, have a lot of knowledge in terms of technology and are very comfortable using technology, whereas inside the classroom, I mean, aside from their obviously texting or things like that, I've seen students doing that comfortable, but to really use different technological programs and to see what their response was in class. When I first brought this up on the first day of class through their syllabi, some students would drop right away, okay, because this was kind of a notion that was very scary. But others then came to, thought, well, this is really cool, this would be a great thing to try. So this is how it ended up. In the fall of 2010, Women's Studies 290, the students would each have their own little post, okay? So all of the students in the class have their own pages, and what they have to do is they go into Google Sites and they print out, they get a Gmail account, and vis-a-vis that Gmail account, then they can have their own web page, okay? So, and in this their own web page, this is where they posted all of the assignments. For instance, the video diaries, the 3 video diaries that they had to do were all similar to pretty much an oral exam. I would give a prompt, okay, and then they would address that in wherever they felt comfortable doing so, with a webcam, and then just speaking into the webcam, okay, and recording it. And so we can see, for instance, one student, and I'll just play like 10 seconds so you can see, but it would go for her, unless she erased it. Okay, so this is 8 minutes. They had to do a minimum of 5 minutes.
Okay. I was going to start by saying that anorexia and bulimia and eating were very prevalent and common in the 1960s, but it wasn't really known in the society until the 1980s. That's when it kind of became publicly known. Karen Carpenter, she's a singer. She actually died from anorexia, and that's how kind of the public found out about this disease, and they really came about knowing about it because of this incident. And that's when people were like, wow, this really is a problem. There are 3 things that kind of factor into suicidal eatings. The first one is cultural factors, and which leads me to my first quote. It's from I'll Die for a Revolution, but Don't Ask Me Not to Diet on page 54. It says, to be female and...
Okay, so the video diaries start with a prompt, and then the students address the prompt in any way they see fit, utilizing also quotes, okay? So again, you can see that it's similar to an oral exam, but the learning doesn't stop, is what I realized, is because other students would go in and listen to go into other students' web pages, okay, and listen to what they were recording, what they were presenting, what they were sharing. They were also forced to do so because they had to go in and watch 5 video diaries from 5 students in the class, listen to them, and then comment on them. For the first video diary, they didn't have to do so, but in the subsequent ones, they were required to do so, okay? The narrative commentary now we were using a different program for which was the screencast-o-matic. For the video diaries, we used straight vanilla Vidler. Okay, and the narrative commentaries, the students enjoyed much more because they had a little bit more freedom. It wasn't me giving a prompt, but rather I said, what you are to do is to come up with your own idea, okay, and present it. For instance, in this class, some students talked about photoshopping and how this related then to, for instance, disordered eating and feminist studies, gender studies, okay? But again, they had to come up with artifacts from the internet and use these in their narrative commentary. Also, students were required then to watch 5 narrative commentaries and comment on them. And what we would see is sometimes students would watch the same ones and we would have a really interesting dialogue that would be going. I'll just pull up one. I don't really pull up somebody else here. Okay, this was, I think it started here. Okay, she started with, okay. Well, as you can see from there, it's just, she came up with pictures from the internet and then pasted quotes on, and then was talking in the background. Sometimes some of these, because they've been
Is that the lyrics in the song?
yeah, that's part of it, but she was talking over it, I'm not sure why it's not coming. But the point of the narrative commentary was to come up with artifacts they found on the internet, and then to use those.
Hello, and this is Women's Studies 290 Starboard Stuff, and we are here at a mall outside New Hampshire to conduct a study of the popular belief that certain stores carry certain biases toward people, particularly women, with different body sizes.
Okay.
I'm Cassie. And I'm Chris.
Investigate and conduct this study, we are going to go to stores such as Hollister, Wayne Bryan, and then either a Macy's or JCPenney, what we see as the middle of the spectrum. We're going to be asking for applications for the different stores. We're hopefully going to be doing an interview with the employee and asking employee questions. And we're also going to be observing what sizes are available at the stores.
Is there? Okay.
Well, that's no good. Are you trying to in the video?
Yeah. This is the volume here. No. Where's the volume?
Usually if you scroll to the bottom of the video, there's a little volume control.
I think volume is it too in the machine, maybe.
Yeah, why this is. Okay, yeah, I can start with. So you can see that they're using, actually, this was in a real example, not from the internet. So they're videotaping this and then pasting it with quotes. And this was a really interesting one, actually. So.
The sound is
So this particular exercise was very intriguing to students, much more so than the video diaries, because all the video diaries were very restricted to the prompts. But in their narrative commentaries, it was utilizing, again, as you can see, artifacts that were very provocative. Okay, And that caused a reaction, and again, it furthered their not only their knowledge, but their dialogue. Our class might have ended, for instance, but the dialogue kept going on. The learning didn't stop. And that's surely due to technology. Okay? Now, our final project is they had to do a YouTube video, and they were working in groups, okay? And they would pick whatever kind of topic they wanted. Again, that had to do with the theme of the class, and then they would be recording it. So they had some really interesting ones. On our webpage as well, I wanted to talk about, let's see here, we can go back to, okay, so not only did students have their own page, but we also, through this class, this web page became our dialogue, okay? So you can see students also were required to post interesting links from whether they be articles in a newspaper to different programs, etc. And, you know, I just actually asked for 5, but the students posted much more, some more so than others, and then commented on them. And they were required to comment on 5, but the comments, they did much more. And I think that then was evidence that the learning was continuing, and it was much more exciting than the traditional papers. Even though at first it was scary, and it was for me as well, because this was something I'd never done before. But now it's something that I wouldn't change. I have no desire to go back to traditional papers. This is too much fun, and it's also just, you can be anywhere and you can do it. I showed this, I gave talks when I was in Honduras for a year, and this was something that I showed. This is what we're working on. And I showed this to I was teaching in both the Spanish literature as well as the Women's Studies department when I was in Honduras for a year. And so this was something that I taught the students, and we actually, from this particular webpage, I hosted a protest on campus, which there was about 500 people that were in this protest because it was all the women's studies classes. There were 17 sections and 50 to 60 people in each section. And so I went and I talked to them first and showed them this, and then they came out and they made their own, for instance, they're all paper things that they made, but they're in my office. They made handouts to give out to people. And you would never believe that eating disorders would be an issue in Honduras, but it's a tremendous issue. And if it were not for this webpage, I wouldn't have had the means to explain it and show not only what we're doing here at Keene State, but to give them bibliography, much other things to go and look at. Because this particular class, the students spoke English, so they were able to utilize this. You know, some more difficult than others, but, and also in Honduras, there's no books because of, well, I would say there's no books in the university, but you can't ask the students to buy books because books cost, they're too expensive. So again, having this particular webpage, the students all had access to the web because on their phones they could do that. So this was a wonderful tool, a wonderful way to give readings and assignments and to talk about. So what we did at Keene State went to other countries and was very provocative for them as well. So this website also was where I would post, and you can see why this would be good is for my class in Honduras and my class here, but I also posted all the PowerPoints. so students could go in and access these PowerPoints and read them. So,
Do you want to leave a little time?
yes,
for
I do.
questions? Okay, we have about 10 minutes. if you want to
Okay,
do those
well,
questions.
this is actually all I pretty much,
I had planned, that's great.
yeah, yeah. So any kind of questions that you might have, this is a work in progress.
So did the students in your class, did they actually drop the class at first because they were for the technology? So the one who stayed were the brave one who decided to give it a shot
Mhm.
and then,
Yeah, I don't want to say many people drop, but
Just
about 4 to 5 people.
you know, because your classes?
Well, my class is 25,
Oh,
so
yeah.
25. Or maybe 28 could fit in that room, but then other people came in and
Those
joined.
seats were filled. And,
Yes.
yeah. Did you, the other question, did you just do this one time right now? This is the first time you've done this?
No, I started in 2010. Actually, I've done it 5 times.
And the students who didn't take your class in the first time, have you kind of developed a culture that now they might be interested to not take your class?
Well,
Right.
there's a few here to support.
I am not at all tech savvy, and I was definitely nervous and apprehensive when she said this was a really technologically heavy course. But I mean, she's had Matthew come in, and she's been really like, "We will hold your hand through this." And I think I was scared at first, but I feel like I can handle it, and I think I'll be better off because I'll know how to do this stuff that I didn't know how to do before.
I have to add this, actually. A student of mine got a job in Silicon Valley because of this particular class. I got an email and a really nice letter saying, and I shared it with Matthew, saying, if it weren't for your class, I would never have gotten this job because I had said that I knew how to make videos. And I know how to use, because they said, what kind of technological applications do you know how to use? So she's like, Viddler, Screen-O-Matic, YouTube. And they said, well, where did you learn that? You know, because that's just not necessarily as common. And she said, well, we did this in my women's studies course. So it was a job that was based on helping women out that were in shelters. Okay, it was I don't remember exactly, but then utilizing the technology. So I just got that when I came back from Honduras in the end of December.
Nice.
Yeah. Other questions?
Sorry. Oh, this is showing my ignorance. Is this a closed, in other words, this is not for public?
It is.
It
It is public access.
And the students, in other words, you have to get all permissions from the students. Do you not?
Well, they know that, and what happens is, this is for public. I know that if you go on to the KeeneCommons.net, some of the professors have it, there's closed. But this is open, and at the end of the class, when we're done, the students have the option of taking down their webpage. Because that's why I was going to say I didn't know who's to go to, because some of these, although they say their name, you might go to some and then nothing will come up right now.
Okay.
Because some students have taken down their webpage.
So that you have the control.
And this is done with Google Sites.
Yes.
Now, Google Sites is a new feature they installed last year, I think, where you could actually have privacy setting for individual pages. So your site could be public, but some of the pages could be private. So that's, and you know, if the privacy issue is an issue, you could make it public so you could still use it as a forum, but you could also have the ability to make a page private.
Isn't there a way to make it so that only people can see it who have the link?
That you could do that as well, yeah.
Not only the people
Yeah.
in the class.
But, you know, it may defeat the purpose of the openness of it, and it always depends on the content, but yeah.
I haven't had any real issues in the 5 semesters I've done this with women's gender studies. You no. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.